Greetings, YouTubers! You all out there are my children now.
Hello YouTubers, you're watching the first episode of The Final Cut, in which I will review older classic horror films. And this is going to be more of a retrospective review. For our first episode, we will be going over the classic from 1984, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, this was one of Wes Craven's earlier films. He directed other horror films such as The Hills Have Eyes before this. And he wrote this script around 1981. Passing it through different studios, and none of the studios really wanted to touch the script. And I don't know why. I could guess maybe it's too visual effects heavy and probably the content, but it's very different from any other horror series at the time, and it's far different from Friday the 13th or Halloween or any of the other slasher horror films at that time. Originally, Wes Craven, when he was writing this script, he saw stories over like in China or whatever of people talking about someone attacking them in their dreams. And later on it turned out those people died in their sleep. And it's pretty bizarre having something real happen, but that was somewhat of the basis for A Nightmare on Elm Street of Freddy Krueger, along with two other things. There was a bully whose name was Freddy or whatever at his school that like really kind of gave him bad memories, so he's like, why don't I name this guy after a bully at my school? And then as far as appearance, he saw a man like a large trench coat and a hat walk down an alley like a homeless man, and Wes Craven as a child looked through the window at the guy, and the guy stared back, and it kind of scared him and really stayed with him. So those three elements really added to like the creation of Freddy Krueger. Anyways, Wes Craven pretty much tried to sell the script to different studios, and really grabbed the attention of Robert Shea, who was over New Line Cinema at the time, and they weren't like the studio they are now, and they would just distribute films. So one of them was like Pink Flamingos and stuff like that had their distribution rights too. And at that time they'd mostly have small venues at like prisons or college campuses around there and army bases. So it started off small. So like Nightmare on Elm Street was like the first production they made as a studio that really paved the way for the rest of the movies afterwards, like Blade, The Mask, Lord of the Rings. None of that really would have been around if it wasn't for the success of the first Nightmare on Elm Street I'm talking about today, or its numerous sequels. So Nightmare on Elm Street, story-wise, it is about a man named Freddy Krueger who keeps on attacking these children in their dreams. You have Heather Langenkamp playing Nancy. Her father is a sheriff. He's played by John Saxon. Robert Englund. He had some history on V, but he's very different from Freddy Krueger. And originally, Freddy Krueger was going to be portrayed by a stuntman, and Wes Craven felt like, no, I think I need an actor. He just wasn't getting the right performance. And I think that helps, because having an actor in this really gives the character a personality and charisma that's really lacking from other horror icons like Jason or Michael Myers. And this wasn't the humorous Freddy as we see in the sequels. Like, this is a serious like killer in the original Nightmare on Elm Street. But yeah, it's a very compelling story. It starts off with a nightmare in a boiler room, and Nancy's friend Christina is basically being haunted by this man named Fred Krueger. It starts with them spend the night at Christina's house, and it's Glenn, Christina's boyfriend, Rod, and Nancy and everybody figuring out that they have a nightmare, the same nightmare with this man with the razor claws. So they stay over one night, and Glenn and Nancy are like in separate rooms. Glenn's in the living room, and Rod and Christina are together, make out, make love, and then she ends up getting killed. And it's a very elaborate sequence, and I must go on to the visual effects in this film are probably the most terrifying. I remember first seeing this movie when I was 6 years old. Unwillingly, my brother-in-law showed it to me, and it scared the crap out of me for the remainder of my life, probably until Sinister. But it also had an influence on me as a viewer and as a filmmaker. So she gets killed in midair, this crazy elaborate sequence where she's getting killed in her dreams, floating in midair, and then like all this blood goes, she dies, and they blame Rod for it, and he didn't murder her. So he's on the run, he gets arrested, and meanwhile Nancy and Glenn know that he didn't do it. He ends up dying, and pretty much all the kids are being targeted one by one in their dreams. And Nancy starts seeing more of Fred Krueger. So, like, the whole movie, you have, like, this psychological element that's really different from other horror films. It's not just the usual slasher, stab them, they're dead. There's characters you actually care about, and it's much more of a build-up to each, like, killing. And, like, is Nancy going to be next? And there's just something really messed up. I mean, there's other horror movies that are great, but there's something really, really messed up with somebody who can kill you in your dreams. Like, to not fall asleep, and it shows, like, the effects Nancy's having by not falling asleep. She's constantly getting coffee to stay awake watching TV, having Glenn stay over to make sure she doesn't fall asleep. Her hair starts to turn white, just different effects like that. Meanwhile, you figure out later that Fred Krueger actually was a child killer who existed. And Nancy's dad, along with some of the other parents, basically burned Freddy Krueger alive and are responsible for killing him. After he gets arrested, Fred Krueger got arrested for the child killings, but he got off. He wasn't guilty. So after getting scot-free, all the parents just pretty much burned him alive, which is why he has these burns. And it's really crazy in that regard of, like, the children paying for the sins of the parents, like the child paying the sins of the father, you know? And there's an interesting theme there in that regard to this original Nightmare on Elm Street. Glenn gets killed off, Johnny Depp gets killed off in a really famous elaborate way, and it goes to show the visual effects. He gets sucked in under the bed and all this blood. And Nancy, at the end, has to basically face off against Freddy Krueger and overcome her fear, and basically realizes by her believing in Freddy Krueger, she's given him strength. So after kind of like a pair of booby traps and stuff, she realizes that she needs to just forget about Freddy Krueger, and by doing that, she takes away all his power he has against her. So originally on the ending, Wes Craven wanted just a one-and-done story. It wasn't going to be a franchise like the way we know it today. It was just going to have her not believe in Freddy, him go away, and then be a regular ending. But Robert Shea kind of wanted more sequels and stuff on it, so they added an ending where, like, Freddy Krueger gets the mother, and then the kids, they didn't get off scot-free, and, like, the whole thing maybe be a dream. And throughout the movie, you get to see three girls jump rope, and it's really odd just seeing that throughout the film, and it makes you question, like, is the film, like, which parts are dream, which parts are reality, or is the whole movie a dream? In that regard, it's very, very surreal. But overall, that's a basic plot. I don't want to spoil too much, even though there's probably many people who have seen it. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend seeing A Nightmare on Elm Street. It is a great classic American horror film, and Freddy Krueger is one of the most terrifying horror icons. There's Michael Myers and Jason, all in that 80s era, but Freddy Krueger really is, they're up there with, like, Frankenstein, Boris Karloff's Frankenstein, The Mummy, Lon Chaney Jr.'s The Wolfman, and Bela Lugosi's Dracula, like, really up there in that status. It's nice having Freddy not be Jason or Michael, who's basically big, built, silent, and just kills you. Like, he likes to toy with his victims like a cat likes to toy with a mouse. There's a build-up to it before he kills them in each dream, and all of the dream sequences play upon the fear of that individual, and that makes him very unique and also very evil. Nancy, Heather Langenkamp does a great job. Johnny Depp, I mean, all the kids do a great job. They're pretty much like average American boys and girls next door. And it doesn't feel fake. And there's just so much to be missed in newer horror films. It's just like the simple nature of everyone in this movie. You don't have any of that glam teeny bopper stuff. Like, it all feels very real. One thing I love about Wes Craven horror films, and particularly this one, just like the first Scream, is that you actually care for the characters. It's not the usual motif and like themes and tropes of like, oh look, we have the jock, we have the nerd, we have the people who have sex and then get killed. There's a virgin that survives. You know, it's very realistic, and you actually care for the characters. And you get to spend time with them and have character development. And that's something that's really missing from a lot of horror films that I wish more horror films would have that makes this compelling. As far as the effects go, I talked a little bit about them in my story review, but the effects are very elaborate for a low budget. The blood, I mean, there's a part where Freddy Krueger's going down an alley and his arms are like stretching out. Christina, after she dies, Nancy see her in the high school, and like there's body bag and it's like filled with blood. That was just very frightening imagery moving by itself. You later on see that body bag with like bugs coming out of her mouth. It's really bizarre. When she's being chased by Freddy Krueger, some of the effects look a bit dated, but like there's something about practicality that goes a long way compared to computer graphics and stuff. There's a part where like Freddy's like there and she like grabs his face and like it rips off and it's like a skull with like eyeballs popping out. The whole scene with the ceiling was very crazy and is much better done in the 84 version than the recent 2010 remake. Much better. It actually, you just wonder, it's one of those effects where it's just like, how the hell did it do that? I know they had a moving, rotating room, but it's just like, it really looks like she's up there flying around on the ceiling getting stabbed brutally, you know? And then, the boiler room stuff is great. The whole end sequence with the reverse mirror and then breaking through a mirror was fantastic. You have the bathtub scene where he gets the claws through there and then she ends up getting sucked under. Another thing I like about the visual effects is there's this part with a wall, and they used like a projector screen type of material. And they had Nancy, Heather Langenkamp as Nancy, like sleep. There is a crucifix above, and the crucifix gets knocked over. But before that, there was a screen they had, and like they had the actor and Freddy Krueger like go through the wall, so it made it seem like he was like coming out of the wall. And just that simple type of movie magic works a lot better than computer graphics. As I said earlier, with some of the scenes in the 2010 version with the ceiling, that wall scene looked very fake in the new one. It was computer graphics. He went further out, but it just didn't look as scary. And there's just something weird about actually hearing the sound and just seeing like it actually come out into the wall. If you like Nightmare on Elm Street, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. If you have seen it, watch it again. It's a quick little retrospective and thoughts reviews. But if you haven't seen A Nightmare on Elm Street, I highly urge you to see it. Even if you like being scared, not like being scared, it's one of the scariest movies. But not only that, it's a well-made movie. The editing with the shots, Wes Craven did it so well. There is another visual effects shot where he used his tongue to talk through her phone. She's trying to talk to Glenn, and she unplugs the phone because it keeps ringing with his voice, and the phone starts ringing without the cord being plugged in. She answers it. It goes to a close-up of her eyes and it's like, "I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy." And then to a tongue and just like straight to a wide shot of her like seeing the tongue and then dropping it. And it shows the brilliant work both in the camera and in editing and combining those elements. So, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend seeing A Nightmare on Elm Street. I have all the movies. I used to have the Infinifilm edition, but then that kind of got messed up, so I got the 4-pack on DVD. It's also available on Blu-ray. And it's just a testament to show how great this movie is that they cashed in on it on 6 sequels, and then Wes Craven came back for a new Nightmare. They even had a Freddy vs. Jason crossover, and then a remake. So, if you haven't seen this, I recommend it. And especially if you've seen the remake and haven't seen the original, I highly guarantee it. It has a lot of heart and soul into it, but it's really scary. One thing I did not like about the remake is that it was a lot of jump scares, and sure, that kind of gets you after a while, but like this one, there's no jump scares. It's like 5 minutes of constant terror and just long scenes, and it's a much better story and much better cast as far as the acting and how the teenagers are actually friends. And Freddy is also a lot better. Robert Englund is like the one and only Freddy Krueger. Overall, I'm going to give A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 out of 5 stars, or 4 Razor Claws out of 4. It makes the final cut for me as far as what a classic horror film should be. And it's something that's unique, still stands up well today, 30 years later. And it's much better than the remake, much better than some of the sequels. But it's very unique, and it really kind of changed the way horror films were. They were kind of like slasher films, and they really added a lot more psychological element to it that I really, really love. And really, there hasn't been that much like it. I could kind of see some influences it had on some of the nightmare sequences in Insidious, but like, Nightmare on Elm Street's really its own monster. I highly recommend seeing A Nightmare on Elm Street. And tune in for my next episode of The Final Cut, in which I will go over John Carpenter's 1978 classic, Halloween. Enjoy, and whatever you do, don't fall asleep.